Okay, this is a short lecture on biomolecules. First of all, what is organic versus inorganic? Organic compounds are made from living organisms and have carbon and usually hydrogen. Inorganic compounds could have carbon and not always, and they can have hydrogen but not always. Okay, what is it about carbon that makes it so important? Well, carbon, if you remember, has 4 electrons in its outermost shell. That means there are 4 empty spots that it can fill to get a full outer shell. Because it can form 4 covalent bonds, we can get very large molecules. Those molecules can have very many different atoms in it, and they can have very different shapes. Okay, remember we can have molecular formulas and structural formulas. Molecular formulas, they show what elements are present and how many elements there are with the subscripts. So for example, we have 1 carbon, 3 hydrogen, there's another carbon, 2 oxygen, and a hydrogen. The structural formula can be shown like this. The lines represent covalent bonds. So there's 1 covalent bond between carbon and oxygen here. There are 2 covalent bonds between carbon and oxygen there. This is another way we could represent a structural formula. Again, the lines represent covalent bonds, and each of the corners represents a carbon atom. So there would be a carbon here, there would be a carbon here, etc. There's a carbon at each corner that is not listed. Here's another one. So there's a corner, there's a corner, corner. Those have carbons in them. Okay, let's take it a step further from just talking about carbon to now biomolecules. Biomolecules have carbon. Why is this important? Because biomolecules make you up. You are made up of biomolecules. So let's put some monomers together. Remember, a monomer is 1 small part. It could have many atoms in it, but it's 1 small part. We're going to put those together to make polymers. Okay, so first we have 4 major biomolecules. Another term that you might see is called a macromolecule. Macro is a word meaning big. So macromolecules are big molecules, and biomolecules are big molecules. So the 4 main biomolecules we're going to talk about are carbohydrates, which are your sugars, lipids, which are fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, so I just told you that you're made up of biomolecules. Well, every living organism is made up of biomolecules. Biomolecules are the building blocks for life. Okay, so now we're going to talk about monomers and polymers. Mono means 1, mer means part, so 1 part. 1 part in terms of biomolecules consists of many atoms. A polymer, that is many parts. Poly is many, mer means part. So we're going to put a bunch of monomers together to make polymers. So the first up we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Their shapes, you may see them as sort of an O shape or ring shape. You may also see them as sort of a straight line. Typically in class, we're going to show them as O shapes. Okay, carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides. So the monomer for carbohydrates are monosaccharides. Mono means 1, sac means sugar. So a monosaccharide is 1 sugar. Some examples of monomers, we have glucose, fructose, and galactose. So what do all of these names have in common? They all end in OSE. OSE is going to represent carbohydrates. Here's a picture of 1 monomer of a carbohydrate. We have that ring shape. Notice there are a bunch of atoms, so don't think that a monomer is 1 atom. It's a bunch of atoms. Okay, so let's put a monosaccharide and a monosaccharide together. What do we get? We get a disaccharide. Mono means 1, di means 2. So disaccharides are 2 sugars. An example of this is maltose. So this is a picture of a disaccharide. I have one sugar, I have now two sugars. A polysaccharide, poly means many, sac means sugar, so many sugars put together. So this is at least 3 or more sugars put together. So here I have 1, 2, 3. So this would be a polysaccharide. We have 3 examples for polysaccharides. We have starch. This is a storage form for sugar in plants. Glycogen. This is a storage form of sugar for animals. And cellulose. This gives plants stems rigidity, gives them support. Okay, let's move on to lipids. Lipids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Their shape is typically long strings or long chains. You have a long chain of carbon with hydrogens attached to each end, and at one end we have what's called a carboxylic acid group. Over here we have what's called a glycerol. We have a chain of carbons, hydrogens on one side, and OH on the other side. The monomers for lipids are fatty acids and glycerols. There's 2 types. So this is your fatty acid, this is your glycerol. Fatty acids are nonpolar, which means they does not dissolve in water. This is very important when we get to talking about the cell membrane. Polymers, we have what's called a triglyceride. Tri means 3, so we're going to put 3 of these chains together. We're going to link them together at 3 of these locations on a glycerol. Triglyceride is used as a long-term energy storage and insulin. Phospholipid, here's your lipid word. This is the main component of a cell membrane surrounding the wall. Waxes are also made up of lipids. Since it's nonpolar, it's not going to dissolve in water. That makes it waterproof. Okay, there are 2 types of lipids. We have saturated and unsaturated. Saturated fats are found in animals. In saturated fat, all of the bonds in the carbon chains are solid, and they're all full. They all have single bonds. Therefore, it's going to be nice and straight. You're going to find saturated fat in meat and shortening. Unsaturated fat, this is an example of unsaturated. These are found in plants. There's at least 1 double bond in the chain. Right here's your double bond. Since that double bond